I just go, Councillor Lynn?
Yes, please.
Okay, so just to remind you that this is being recorded and will be placed on the council and partnership websites for public viewing. And I'll now take a roll call for the minute. Councillor Lynn?
Present.
Councillor McHugh?
Present.
I've had apologies from Annie Buchanan. Sam Riddle?
Are we in that case, are we quorum? Because there's no one from NH&SCP side.
Yeah. It just has to be 2 voting members. Yeah.
Okay, because it's different on the IJP, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Vicky Irons?
Yes, present, Arlene.
Dave Berry?
Present, Arlene.
James Cotton? Diane McCulloch?
Present, Arlene.
Tony Gaskin?
Present.
I've had apologies from Raymond Marshall and Martin Sloan.
Present.
Great, thank you. That concludes the roll call. Item 1 is apologies for absence, which have been dealt with. Item 2, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations? No. Okay, that takes us on to item 3A, which is the minute of the meeting held on the 20th September, which is submitted for approval.
No, I wasn't at that meeting, clearly, so it would have to be. Well, I can go ahead and say, is this an accurate record of the meeting, and ask for a seconder on that. I think. Dorothy, you're on mute, but you're nodding, so it's okay. So on to the action tracker. There's quite a lot of green on the action tracker, some amber. Any questions on that? No. Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 4, Performance and Audit Committee membership and chairperson, and this is for noting.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you.
Item 5, Audit Scotland Annual Report and Integration Joint Board Annual Accounts 2021 to 2022.
This is on. I've got this on a separate. I forgot to. I was in the office yesterday. I forgot to get the papers up, so I'm on my iPad. It's just a wee bit more tricky. If you'll just bear with me for a second.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce that.
Yeah, if you could go ahead, please, while I get
that sorted out. That's okay. So,
yeah, I've got it now. Yeah, here we are. Go ahead.
So you have before you the audited accounts and the external auditors annual reports on the activities of Dundee Integration Joint Board for the financial year 21-22. So you'll recall that the unaudited accounts were presented to the IGB back in June, after which they were then presented or handed over to Audit Scotland for Audit Scotland to carry out the audit process. So since that time, there's been a number of kind of going backwards and forwards with auditors in terms of kind of some points of clarification, some minor changes, particularly around sort of some of the wording, and some updates given the sort of the time period passing between June and present. So obviously the world hasn't stood still since then. So there's a wee bit of updating being done since that period. So I'll pass over to our external auditor partners in a second, but just before we do, I just first of all like to kind of pass on my thanks to the Health and Social Care Partnerships Finance team for all the work that they've done in getting the accounts to this stage, and also others that have also contributed, particularly from the strategy team, with other sort of bits of information that's been asked for and included within the report. Before I pass on to Anne-Marie and Cara, just to note that this is the final audit that will be provided by this particular audit team. So Anne-Marie's certainly been a constant for the last few years for us as part of the Audit Scotland team that we've kind of worked alongside. And I'd just like to kind of formally put my kind of thanks on record for all the support that we've had from Anne-Marie and the team over that period. I think we've had, given that we kind of started this sort of kind of audit partnership right at this, almost at the start of integration. There's been a lot of learning for all of us in terms of how the complex world of health and social care integration kind of transpires into a set of accounts and kind of reporting. I think there's been quite a few challenges we've had on the way in terms of kind of differences of opinions, but we've always worked these through well and got to kind of satisfactory conclusions. So yeah, that's kind of a big thank you to Anne-Marie and the team at Audit Scotland. We will be having another team from Audit Scotland coming in to pick up on our audit for the next 5 years or however long the IGB is still in existence at that point in time. So, but yeah, thanks to Anne-Marie and the team for all the work that they've done on that. And at that point, I'll pass on to Anne-Marie to take you through the accounts.
Dave, thank you. And then I suppose really at this stage it would be appropriate for me to say again now thank you to your team in terms of the support that you have given to the audit over the course of the past 6 years. It should have been 5 years if it hadn't been for the pandemic, and that hopefully will be another 5 years going forward with the new audit team, who should hopefully be in touch in the very near future with you and Vicky to go through that sort of introductory process as well. So what I'll do is I'll now start going through the papers related to the annual accounts process, and so they're in the supplementary agenda that you've received. So it was this sort of a second set of papers that that we got last week. So so there's two papers that we're presenting today, and they're starting on PDF page 7, and these are our ISA 580 cover letter, which includes the proposed independent auditor's report, which is now reflected in the annual accounts, and the ISA 580 letter, which is part of the assurances from Dave as the Chief Finance Officer to us related to the annual accounts sign-off process. And what happens with that is that Dave will sign that at the end of today, after the accounts are approved, and then that allows us as external auditors to take that as part of the suite of assurances from yourselves to allow the appointed auditor to sign off the accounts. And then the second document you have is our sort of annual audit report, and the readership for that is yourselves and the other IGB members, and it is also addressed to the Accounts Commission and the Controller of Audit, because that's another part of the important leadership for them, the annual audit report, as part of this process. So the first thing I was wanting to touch on was in terms of the cover letter, and a key sort of assurance from us is that it's our confirmation that all the requested information has been provided to us as part of the audit, and the audit is actually now complete. At the point that we submit these papers to be included in the papers, there's usually some sort of a tail end pieces of information that are going backwards and forwards to allow us to conclude an audit. So that's an important sort of assurance from us. Then another thing I was wanting to touch on in terms of the cover letter is specifically related to paragraph 7 of the cover letter, and it's where we are seeking assurance or confirmation from the PAC members as those charged with governance of their knowledge of any instances of any actual suspected or alleged fraud or any subsequent events that have occurred since the date the financial statements were struck, i.e. at the 31st of March, or of any material non-compliance with laws and regulations affecting the IGB that should be brought to our attention. So with reference to this paragraph 7, can members confirm for us and for the meeting minute if they're aware of anything in this regard?
I'll go first. I am not aware of anything. Dorothy?
Neither am I.
Yeah. And just, oh, sorry.
I'm not sure of mine. I think it's just Dorothy and Ken, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And linking back to the the letter that Dave provides us, he also provides us written confirmation of his knowledge around this matter. So thank you for that. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to move into the annual audit report, and I'm going to mainly focus on the sort of key messages and sort of linking them with the recommendations that we've made in the report. So that's starting on PDF page 21 of the supplementary papers. So in the key messages, we sort of highlight our audit opinions across all the areas of the annual accounts, and we note that these are unmodified. So using different terminology or sort of a more familiar terminology, often that means unqualified. This is a key assurance from external audit for the PAC members related to the decision to authorise the annual accounts for issue. Again, related to the audit conclusions and the key messages on the annual accounts, there are two key items to reference from the annual audit report, which are noted in Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 3 of the report. So regarding Exhibit 2, which is PDF page 28, when planning an audit and using our knowledge of the client, we assess where there are audit risks and then design our audit work around these assessed risks. Exhibit 2 in the annual audit report notes identified significant audit risks for 21-22 that we identified, and our conclusion on the audit work that we undertook related to this risk. From this, we have been able to conclude that there was no evidence of management override or controls. And an important thing to mention regarding this particular audit risk is that it's one which, under the auditing standards, that we must consider for all our audits, and it isn't just an audit risk specifically identified for Dundee City IJB, but it nonetheless is something that we take very seriously when we're undertaking our audit work. So also related to the auditing standards, something that we are required to communicate to yourselves as PAC members, and again as those charged with governance, we have to report any significant findings from the audit. And this year this is noted in Exhibit 3 in the annual audit report, which is on PDF page 29. And that notes one significant finding which is reported for information. Quite often within this section of the report, you would maybe see if there'd been significant changes to the annual accounts, and here we would sort of lay that out and how the matter had been resolved. But this year, the only significant finding that we've got is one for information. And it's something that you'll be familiar with, but in terms of the readership of this report, it's important that we capture this point, and that relates to the significant increase in the reserves at the year end for the IGB, and how the balance in the reserves for the future spending has increased by 25 million, which is a reported underspend for the year, which has taken the IGB's reserves position to almost 39 million. And if you go back a couple of years, that's a significant increase in terms of what the IGB's reserve position used to be. So later on in the report, you would have seen that we refer further to the reserve position in the financial sustainability section of the report. So and again, it's reflecting back on something that Dave said as part of his introduction, and it's important for us to comment on it as well. Although there have been some changes made to the annual accounts through the audit process, none of these changes were significant in nature. So again, that's another important assurance from external audit to the committee in their consideration of the papers that you have in front of you today. So I'm going to move to the financial management and the sustainability section of the report. So that is starting on page 30. So here you will see that we have concluded that the IGB has appropriate and effective financial management arrangements in place, and also that the IGB's budget monitoring arrangements are appropriate. And again, these are key assurances from us as external auditor, as the external audit team for the PAC. And these are important because we can't say that for every audit that we undertake. So these are important key messages in terms of Dundee City IGB and its arrangements. So again, within this section of the report, we make reference again to the overall reserve position for the IGB, noting that of that total 38, almost 39 million, 29 million of that general fund reserve is earmarked for specific purposes. And also related to the board's reserve position and emerging funding pressures and risks, we have made a specific recommendation around management ensuring that there are appropriate arrangements in place to monitor and report to the joint board related to the reserve position, part of which relates to reporting on the achievement and impact of any transformational change, which is becoming increasingly more important, and reporting against any savings plans. and making sure that there is a documented reserve strategy in place. This is really important to support the joint board in being able to make informed decisions going forward, and users are well aware of the changing environment that potential is coming down the line. And it's always been important, but I think it's becoming increasingly important for IJBs. So I'm now going to move on to the key messages on the governance, transparency and best value section of the report, which starts on PDF page 37. And here again, it's another important conclusion from external audit. And our conclusion is that the joint board has appropriate governance arrangements in place to support scrutiny of decision making, and it has conducted its business in an open and transparent manner. And again, linking back to the audit opinions on the annual accounts, we have also been able to report that the annual governance statement is consistent with the financial statements and has been prepared in accordance with relevant regulations and guidance. And that's an overt assurance from us as external auditors. So in terms of the governance arrangements, although we've been able to provide positive assurance overall, we have noted some areas for consideration, one of which you are again familiar with, which is included in the governance action plan tracker, is around the importance of ongoing training and development for the members to ensure that users are supported in the roles that users undertake. And again, that's an important thing in terms of what you do in terms of your parent bodies as well. And again, in terms of some of the specific recommendations that we're making around the area of governance, we note that there's further work required around the best value reporting cycle. And that's important because best value is a statutory duty in terms of the IGB as well as a local authority. And also that the PAC's terms of reference should be reviewed to ensure it is operating in accordance with best practice. Because from our review of the best practice guidance, there was a few areas that are noted in the annual audit report that should be copied over into the PAC's terms of reference. So again, our final recommendation in the annual audit report relates to the governance improvement activities of the joint board, and we note, and linking that into the sort of a current sort of a change agenda for the IJB, that following the ministerial approval of the revised integration scheme, that the governance arrangement should be checked off against the revised integration scheme to see what improvements or changes need to be made. But related to that also, and as part of that process, we're recommending that management should review its various governance actions that it's already identified for their currency against the IGB strategic priorities and risk profile, and against its capacity to deliver the various governance improvements. And from the governance action plan tracker, there's quite a lot in there, and as time moves on, it may be a valid or a good time to check what governance actions still need to be implemented in light of that sort of a changing environment and agenda for the IJB. So I'm going to sort of just briefly mention the action plan in the annual audit report, which starts on PDF page 46. And it was just to sort of relate to the committee that we're comfortable with management's responses to our recommendations and the completion dates that have been provided by them. But as always, it would be important for the committee to keep the achievement of these actions under review alongside all the various actions that you have in place. So in terms of the actual annual audit report, that was really all I was wanting to say, and myself and Cara would be happy to take any questions from you.
Yeah, thanks for talking us through that, Anne-Marie, and I'd like to echo what Dave said, and thank you for all the work that you've done to produce this. Is there any questions, Dorothy? Or Sam's here now. Sam, we're on item. I've forgotten what item it is. It's the audit report.
Item 5.
Yeah,
Item 5.
apologies, my system is playing up, but I managed to get on through an iPad.
Oh yeah, no problem. So yeah, you've had a chance to look at this. You wouldn't have heard Anne-Marie talking us through it, but do you have any questions?
No, I'll catch up, and then I'll be.
I found that, Anne-Marie, thank you, very helpful, because I did struggle with the paperwork. As a non-accounting person, I did find it quite difficult. So that was a useful summary and highlights. One of the things I like tables, and when I see tables, I always pay special attention. And one of the things I did notice was, as you commented on about the growth in the reserves, and you said, I think, something about a reserve strategy. Do we have a reserves strategy? I'm sure we do.
I'll come in on that, Dorothy. Yeah, so we do have a reserves strategy as part of our financial regulations within the IGB, and that's set at the IGB having at least a reserve of 2% of our annual budget, which takes us to between £5 and £6 million now. The issue that we've got at the moment, and Anne-Marie's highlighted, is that the majority of that funding, that the reserves that we've got, are actually kind of ring-fenced, particularly kind of Scottish Government funding around COVID and mental health, primary care, ADP, etc. So there's an awful lot of that's kind of actually ring-fenced. And I know we're still looking at last year's in this report in terms of 21-22, but what you'll see in 22-23's position is that kind of the value of the reserves will be kind of reduced quite significantly because of the spend and kind of interventions that have been made to kind of reduce those. So it's an all-time high for 21-22, probably never likely to be repeated, but the 22-23 position will show you something different on that.
Does that relate also then to uncommitted reserves? Because that, I mean, that what is that standing at 9933? That's risen from, well, started with 0, of course. So, and will that figure change in the next year's reporting?
It will change because there will be a number of factors. So if you recall, the IGB has recently made some decisions which have committed some of the unallocated reserve, so that will change. It will also change depending on what our kind of final outturn position is for 22-23. So if we are in a further underspend position, as we are projecting at the moment, then that would add to the reserve balances. If we are in an overspend position, then we would need to kind of draw out some of these reserves first of all before we seek any financial contribution from our partner bodies. So the position it's not going to be exactly the same as it is now. It will change. We see Anne-Marie's got her hand up.
Yeah, Anne-Marie's want to come in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just to kind of reiterate the point that we're trying to make. It's about the reserve strategy being developed to sort of set out how and when monies will be spent, given the sort of the increase in the reserves balance, the different uses of the reserve balances, and potentially some of the risks that might be coming down the line, and relating that back to what the reserves might need to be used for. So it's taken from what's already there and developing it a bit further as well.
I just come back in because we will be shortly kind of starting off some of our IGB budget development sessions for 22-23. And given the anticipated financial challenges for next year and beyond, then reserves are going to have to kind of form part of our solutions to kind of work our way out of that. So it's good that we've got the reserves, because it gives us the flexibility that we're going to need certainly into next financial year.
It certainly is good given the current scenario that we face. So I don't think there's any other hands up. Again, thanks for that, and for the recommendations, which we of course fully accept and will work through. Dorothy, one last word from you.
Sorry, I did note also the comment about register of interest on the Joint Board's website needs updating, and I wondered if I needed to do something about that.
Sorry, Ken, I'll come in on that one. Yeah, I'd spoken to Willie Waddle about this previously, and I think there was an updated register, but of course then there was kind of further changes in membership. So it is something that we so Willie needs to kind of send something back out again to the members to update it. So Dorothy, there'll be a request coming in to you around that, but there's nothing you need to do right at this moment in time.
Fine. Yeah, there have been a big change in membership, hasn't there? Certainly to be updated. So we're asked to agree the recommendations, in particular instruct the Chief Finance Officer to update us by February 2023 and to arrange for the above accounts to be published no later than 30th November in 7 days' time. So can we agree that? Yep, thank you. And thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
Shall we move on?
Yes, please.
Okay. Item 6, drug and alcohol services indicators. You're asked to agree the recommendations.
Just wait while I get this up, sorry. Sorry, what page is it?
13.
15. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. So, would someone like to speak to this first, please? Diane?
Shall I make a start?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And I will then hand over to Diane. So this report was prepared following the PAC's previous request for more local indicator data sets on priority areas of business to be developed in addition to the quarterly performance reports and in-depth analytical reports already submitted to the PAC. So we recognise the importance of drug and alcohol as an area for improvement, high deprivation in Dundee and associated substance use, and with Dundee having the 4th highest prevalence of drug use in Scotland, we agreed to make a start on this area. So the indicators were developed by working closely with analysts in public health who lead on the data for drug and alcohol for the ADP. So we realise that the data proposed in this data set doesn't include everything in drug and alcohol services. However, we tried to identify indicators that can be robustly reported at regular intervals moving forward, and also focused on measures that relate to the delegated functions and health and social care partnership services. So if the PAC approves this data set, we will further develop this into 6 monthly performance report. We'll both include the data as shown in this report, and also offer additional narrative of improvement activity and the measurement of the impact of this as well. You can see that this hasn't been targeted in this draft report, but this will be further developed. We're also working on a similar report for mental health. We're following the same process, and we intend to have a draft available for the PAC very shortly. I'll hand over to Diane now to discuss the improvement activities surrounding the data that's in this report.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I suppose there's a couple of things to say just in by way of context before we start looking at any of the data or any questions that people might have. The period which has been reported on really describes a really very difficult time within our drug and alcohol services, where staffing became really quite critical, particularly around our nursing staff, but also in regards to kind of our wider kind of team that support people who use services. And that resulted in a decision to significantly delay the number of people that we were able to see going forward who were newly presenting, and the timing in which we actually did that. The reason for that was that we had our nurses were carrying really significant numbers of cases, and actually we felt that we were in a position where it was not safe to be able to continue to bring new people into the service. So the quarters that you're seeing are reflected of that, and they're reflected of a period of time both where we had new people waiting to come in, but also really quite lengthy waiting lists in terms of the service, and we're still working through that historical waiting list. So for a period of time we will see our stats not being where they want to, because for a number of the people that were waiting to come in, we're taking some time to be able to track them down, to be able to have the kind of conversations, the proactive discussions that we need to have before we decide whether or not they still want to remain on our waiting lists. And that will just take a little bit of time, but we are seeing a significant improvement in that work already. And one of the reasons why we're seeing that is that we have now moved in line with the introduction of the medication assisted treatment standards to reintroduce what we describe as our drop-in access. That means that for 2 full days a week, people can just come along to the clinic. They will be seen on that day. Assessments will be carried out where possible and it's safe. We will look to introduce same-day prescribing for people who require treatment, and we'll continue to work through with those individuals. What we're seeing is that a number of people that we've been able to contact who are on our waiting list are now coming to those clinics. So we're able to start removing them from the data which is showing in relation to more than 6 weeks in terms of wait time. But there are still some people that we've not been able to kind of access in terms of that work. So we've continued to very proactively do that. And it means that we're in the position where our figures are not yet where we want them to be. I thought it was worth just doing a little bit of a check in terms of what our situation is in regards to our new referrals. So those people either who are, and this is a combination of people who are brand new, but also people who are coming along to the service. But of those in regards to our waiting times, we're looking at something like 96% of those who are new people coming through the door to us, who are actually now being seen within the 0 to 3 weeks or 3 to 6 weeks between the period of the beginning of October and obviously not yet at the end of December. So we are actually starting to move and shift that for those who are new, and we're seeing a significant reduction in the number of people who are waiting over 6 weeks as those people were able to contact or able to come along to the direct access clinic. So a huge amount of work going on to really try and kind of support, to tidy, to look at what we need to do in order to shift that. But I suspect it'll be into the next quarter, so the quarter of January to March, before we'll finally start to see the figures touching where we need to be as we still work through our historical waiting lists. Lindsay's mentioned some of the improvement work that's going on. So obviously MAT standards were to be commenced by the end of September. So clinics were part of that work, same-day prescribing in terms of the systems that we've got in place for that. Huge amount of work done over the pandemic around access to naloxone. And you'll also see from the figures that our non-fatal overdose numbers are starting to reduce. And that's because we're seeing less people coming through several times. We still have people that we would describe as repeat, and that we're picking them up more than once, but we're seeing that number reduce as well. And that's because we're able to get the kind of services into people as soon as we're starting to identify that people might have an issue. And that's both statutory services in terms of treatment, but also third sector and engagement and the work that we need to be doing. There are other areas of work that we're progressing. We're looking at and doing a lot of work around primary care to see how we might support primary care to start to manage people from a primary care setting rather than a specialist treatment setting. That's slow. We're still developing that work, but it is progressing, and we're doing a lot of work with third sector around key working models and encouraging and engaging the primary care to participate. And we're looking at other areas, for example, about the interrelation between mental health and substance use. One of the last bits of work I would just want to touch on in terms of feedback is around the residential rehabilitation pathway. So we've worked with a third sector organisation called We Are With You, and the work that we're looking there is to prepare people for residential rehabilitation, because sometimes people's expectations are either too high for the expectation of what's going to happen, or they're not going into it with a full understanding of what would be expected of them, but equally how we support people coming out of residential rehabilitation so that people are not coming back to nothing going on in their life and actually falling into patterns or meeting up with people before that they might have that would put them in risk of undoing the good work that they've done. So a lot of work going on. It feels sometimes like there's nothing but good work going on around this field, a huge amount of different kind of programs and projects that are progressing with other things potentially in the pipeline. But just to give a context, that's where we are. So in summary, while the figures showing are not where we want to be, there is improvement, but it'll take us a little bit of time because of our historical position to get to the stage where we're actually achieving the target that we want. But at this stage, we'd be looking at coming into the next financial year with a much more improved position. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. I'm glad to hear that things are improving, because we've had horrific double whammy over the last 2-3 years, with obviously the pandemic and also the exodus of staff from the service following the publication of the Drug Commission report, and that was most certainly an unintended consequence of the Drug Commission being set up and asked to look at our services and suggest areas for improvement. And I guess recruitment is one of the biggest issues here, recruitment and retention. So that's one of my questions, although it doesn't really relate, I guess, to this item, so maybe not. But
happy to come in though, Ken, if that
Yeah,
would be helpful.
yeah.
So we have actually seen a positive position in terms of our nursing staff, in that we have managed to recruit to nearly all of the vacancies. We've got a couple that we're looking at in regards to the design around the GP practice, that we want to just kind of look at slightly different posts from the learning so far. So actually, in terms of our nursing, we're doing well. Where our problem is at this particular point in time is around our consultants. So one of our consultants chose to move to another area they chose to move to another area. And we are at the moment working with only one consultant because our other consultant unfortunately is unwell. So that's the area that we're struggling at this point, but we have seen a significant improvement in our nursing staff numbers over the last kind of month.
Is there any way to gauge our reputation at the moment? Because clearly when the staff left and there was a reluctance of people to come to Dundee because of the Drugs Commission report, and everything was terrible. That was a perception anyway, although that wasn't, of course, the entire truth. Any signs that we're getting away from that perception of Dundee as a lost cause? Which it never was, but I think we had that perception.
Certainly isn't a lost cause. So I would think that the fact that we have been able to recruit against a backdrop of the lack of staff right across the board is probably very positive in terms of the work that's there. The fact that we have a number of change programs going on that are being kind of discussed at a national level, that we're leading the way in terms of some of that work, albeit it's difficult, and you know, in terms of actually getting there is probably effective. I have a concern around consultant recruitment, but that's a concern that is facing us with all consultants, and particularly in psychiatric health. You look at mental health consultants, it's really very, very difficult to recruit. We were quite fortunate and opportunistic really with our third consultant, in that we had someone who actually approached us to say that they were moving there and looking for resources, and we were able to kind of pull something together to do that. So at this stage in time, I'm not yet confident about the ability to recruit to the consultants post, but that's against a backdrop more of just the lack of consultants. It's not specific to Dundee, it's right across the board. So it's hard to say whether that would be reputational or otherwise. I think we just recognise that for a number of the staff in that service, they've now lived through 2 Drugs Commission's report, and at a time when everybody's incredibly tired, and you know, maintaining and that ability to keep going has been affected, has had an impact on them. But we know that we've got burnout in terms of our staff groups, again right across the piece in terms of all of our services. Had a specific report looking at this service around how staff are coping, etc., on the back of the pandemic, and I've identified some specific issues which we are working on. So it's difficult to say at this stage, Ken. It's a buyer's market, and I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And one last question, and I've asked this elsewhere before. Well, 2 questions really. Onto the indicators on page 17, and I'm looking at number 1, the number of suspected non-fatal overdoses. The number of suspected non-fatal overdose incidents are down quite substantially, and I think I said before that I would take from that if the non-fatal overdoses are down substantially, surely the fatal ones are as well. And that leads on to my second question, because we get these stats every year. I think in August, September, the unfortunately fatal overdoses. And I know what your answer is going to be, but is there any way we could have an indication of that on a kind of 6 monthly basis throughout the year, in the way that this is going to be coming back 6 monthly?
So if I start with the first question,
Yeah,
so non-fatal
please.
overdose, yes, you would expect there to be a correlation, and but we're not in a position where we're able to say that it's absolutely directly one related to the other. Some people unfortunately die following their first overdose situation, and so would never have appeared through the non-fatal overdose. But I would suggest that actually when you're starting to see people and getting those early interventions with individuals coming through that pathway, that there is a good chance that we're actually supporting people not to then go on and have a tragic and fatal incident. So I think the two things actually support one another, but unfortunately not everybody who comes through that service is seen, and not everybody who comes through the non-fatal overdose pathway are actually known to services in the first place. So that engagement, you know, we work hard to get that engagement at that stage. So I think there is a correlation, but it's very hard to determine because of the mixed nature in which people unfortunately lose their lives. With regards to the drug death, that is managed through public health in terms of the work that they do, and they like to look at a review of everybody who has gone through, and sometimes that can take some time. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to kind of determine them making the decisions that they need to make. So it's not data that we're in control of, Ken, unfortunately, to be able to say here's our stats. I would be very reluctant to give information based just on those who we know have passed, because we don't know whether or not that's linked to an overdose or whether or not there are other circumstances which might have influenced that. So we rely on that information. I think it is quite a difficult position. It's also quite confidential until such time as that information is is publicised nationally, but we do have an indicator around that, and we can do comparative data. So I think we'd need to take some advice from public health about how and what we can use in regards to our reporting, and what might be the best way to kind of be able to provide that information, whether or not it's information that can be shared publicly in terms of an indicator or not. But happy to, between Lindsay and her colleagues, we could look at that.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much for that. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Dorothy. Yeah.
Thanks, Diane. In terms of the report, well, the first thing that struck me, I was shocked at the life expectancy sentence that's in there. Absolutely shocked. I shouldn't have been, but I was. That's on the first page. But I have a question that relates to 6.2 in your report. A significant increase in alcohol referrals. Do we know why this is?
So I think there's a couple of things. We do believe that the pandemic has had an impact on that, with people being at home, perhaps kind of drinking within the household, starting off with something that seems fine, the pressures, the stress. So this is something we're seeing nationally as an increase in reported concerns around alcohol. You'll note, for example, that what we're calling alcohol brief interventions has gone down during the period of the pandemic. So that would be because GPs would be able to have that conversation with people presenting, be able to look at them and have those structured conversations around any concerns they might have around alcohol intake and whether or not that was harmful or not. So you're seeing a lack in terms of that aspect of the interventions at an earlier stage. So you've almost got an accumulative number of people coming forward as pandemic is lifting, and people were trying to start to go back to a more normal kind of feature of their life. It is an increase that we've seen. It's something that's been fairly steady over the years. We're actually seeing a reduction in the number of opioid users. There is a change and a shift in the kind of substances that people use, but we're seeing that opioid use coming down, and we're seeing the alcohol use coming up, because those are the areas where we provide treatment. We are noticing, though, that a number of the people that we're contacting actually have managed to deal with it themselves. So I think maybe there's been folk who've been concerned about the drinking, but probably maybe didn't reach a situation where they needed treatment. They just needed support to start to consider how they might kind of address that themselves. So there are a number of different aspects in there, but it's a position where we've seen an increase in alcohol coming out of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you.
I think that particularly with people being on furlough for long periods of time, when perhaps they might have confined their alcohol consumption to the weekends before, they didn't have to worry. You know, people didn't have to worry about going to work the next day. So I guess it crept up on a lot of people.
Yeah.
Uh,
Also, measures tend to be a bit more generous when you're at home than
Well,
they are
yeah.
in an establishment. And that's just,
serious,
you know, very easy
serious
to get through a
matter, though.
bottle.
Very serious matter, because we
I
often
have
forget that alcohol
another-
kills more. Sorry,
sorry.
Dorothy.
I have another couple of questions
do you?
on the indicators. On the first page, the indicators are rolling. I'm not sure I understand that concept of rolling. So could you maybe explain that to me, Diane, please?
I'll let Lindsay come in for that once she did our data.
Absolutely. So we look at the current quarter and we count back the previous 3 quarters so that we get a whole year's worth of data.
Right.
So that allows us to compare quarters by quarter and years by years when the current quarter of the current year might be a part of. So if we were to only report just say 1 quarter and we're previously reporting annually, it gives us a sense of what it would look like over the year so we can compare. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. In indicator 2, percentage of people referred to services who begin treatment within 21 days. And it says that the service is operating a waiting list. How long are people waiting, or am I missing that information further on in this report?
So that information is not collated in this report, and it goes back to the statement I made earlier on, Dorothy, that there was a period within 21-22 where actually we had a significant waiting list because the service got so risky in terms of the number of people both in the service compared with the number of staff to be able to support them. So do that kind of more proactive monitoring and support to individuals already there, and who we need to kind of have that ongoing engagement with in terms of what people are doing and how they're using. So added to the pandemic, added to the ability to see people, we developed a significant waiting list. And I think it says in the report at some point, in fact, under point 2, it says that at the peak, the waiting list was over 300 people. At the point in time which this information was presented, it was 100. So we significantly worked to get through. And if I was looking at some of the stats, and these are unvalidated, so I wouldn't want people to be using them. But I think in July, September, we were sitting with something like 50 to 55 in regards to waiting. So that waiting list is coming down in terms of that historical long-term waiting. But for some people, that was quite significant. Now, part of that is because we may have contacted people and asked them to come in and they haven't arrived. So we would then have to look to give another interview, another appointment, and they maybe still didn't come. We might have moved to a 3rd appointment. So that time just keeps stretching and stretching and stretching. So you've got people who have had significant, and that's the work that we're doing just now, is to really look at that waiting list, to make every effort we can to engage with people. And some people will not want to engage with us, or will have moved on, or will have done certain things, but they equally are not coming back to have that conversation. So we're working really hard to make sure that anybody who still wants to see the service can see them and understand how they can see them. So we do both the drop-in clinics, but we also do a day of planned appointments for those who feel that they don't want to walk into an open environment and wait to be seen. So we still do that as well. And then obviously we'll deal with people, for example, coming out of prison or people coming out of hospital. We'll make those appointments as and when we need to capture people in those circumstances. So the data is not there in terms of it. It is a very difficult set of data because of those reasons. The fact that somebody's waiting doesn't mean that they haven't been offered appointments. It means that they've just not come through the door to have that assessment or had that telephone assessment for us to be able to say we've done the assessment and we've met with them. I think as we go forward and we're managing that waiting list and we're reducing that to a position where we actually know who are actively waiting as opposed to who are historically waiting, then we'll be able to start to give more robust data around that. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, I appreciate that. You know, people, it's actively waiting that we would like to see, and that's very difficult to identify considering all the circumstances. Yes, that's fine. Thank you. I think I had another question. No, it related to the same thing. That's fine, Diane. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to bring Sam in next, please, for his first question as a member of the panel.
Thank you. Diane, my question was, you said the progress with primary care is slow. is any particular blockage? Can you see where the blockages are? Is there anything that can be done to help that?
Sam, just for a little bit of context, what we did was we sought some additional funding from the Scottish Government. We managed that funding in 2 or 3 different ways. So one, what we've done is we've increased the GP capacity in one of our practices where we know we have high number of people registered with specialist services. And we're in the process of trying to recruit a second GP again for a similar situation. So that is building a bit of that capacity in the form of a part-time GP. So the way that we work is we employ full-time, part-time working specifically in this area of work, and part-time as a general practice in the practice. We developed 2 different types of contracts. So one contract is around a holistic assessment in recognition that people whose lifestyles may be such that they're not taking up the kind of checks. We know that there are specific concerns and issues for people who use substances, including alcohol, that we would want to have a more rigorous kind of health monitoring in terms of the work. So that's one of our service level agreements, and that is progressing. Again, slowly, but it is progressing. The other was around what we've described as a shared care approach, and that's where the GPs will actually manage people, and that includes everything from prescription to ongoing support, and the person will effectively transfer from specialist services into the GP practice. What the GPs are looking for, and that's why we need to go back and look at our nursing input to this, is a real understanding of how they will be supported by taking people on. So you'll have practices who've never done this field, and then you've got other practices where people have a bit of a speciality in terms of the work that they're doing. And the other aspect of that is developing a key worker system with the third sector, so effectively taking on some of the role that the nurses might do at this stage in terms of that support. So we're re-looking at the nursing aspect of it to ensure that we've got the right model in order to give the GPs that confidence in terms of the work that they're doing. So just starting actually to move people to one of the practices that has agreed to do it through a service level agreement, and we're testing out a slightly different version of the model from the one that we actually started with. So I think it's about building that confidence. We know that GPs are really struggling in terms of their capacity at this point. This is seen as an additional, because it's an additional paid aspect of the work. There'll be many GPs working with people already, but it's about that taking on that prescribing and support aspect of the work and removing that from the treatment services.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, no problem. I see no further hands, and thanks for answering all these questions. I have to say I'm particularly enthused, as you know, because I'm always on about the work done by the non-fatal overdose team. I was in contact with whoever was coordinating it at the time, although I think we've got a new team leader coming in next year.
We need to recruit,
But yeah, sorry, I'm quite keen. Well, I was invited out to one of their sessions, and I'm quite keen to progress with that because I think the work they're doing is great. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What I'm going to do in the future, we're on item 6, and we're asked to agree the recommendations from 2.1 to 2.4. Are we happy with these the set of indicators? Was anything that anyone feels is missing? I see no indications, so I think it looks like we're happy to agree with recommendations. And thanks for the work you've done, Lindsay, and putting that set of data together, because it's really important that we're kept up to date on what's happening with such, as is detailed in the paper, such a huge problem in Dundee. Thank you. We can move on
to item 7, discharge management performance update on complex and standard delays. This is for noting.
Okay, I think, hi, Lynn. Are you going to speak to this? No.
I think Lindsay's going to speak to you.
Oh, Lindsay, okay.
Questions. Yeah. Is that okay, Lindsay? Oh, no, you're not. You're shaking your head.
I think that's one for yourself, and I'll support.
Okay.
Sorry, Lindsay, it's because I always get the emails from you at the end of the week. I thought, but sorry for putting you on the spot.
No, that's my fault. Lindsay and I should have sorted that between us. Okay, so it is just for noting, and it's the regular update that we give on performance against delayed discharge. And just as always, we start the report just by noting that the way that delayed discharges are reported both locally and nationally is in relation to both complex and non-complex delays. So what we've done is included some of the governance arrangements within the report that we have locally in place. So just to give assurance to the committee that we have a range of different governances in place. So we have a weekly RAG snapshot, which is sent out, I think, probably to some of the people on this group, but also across senior management in the partnership, across Tayside and in NHS Tayside. That gives us, we produce a daily RAG report in terms of the trajectories that have been set for us locally and nationally, and report on that more widely on a weekly basis. I'm currently operating as the Tayside lead for the Discharge Without Delay national work stream, so reporting on behalf of the whole of Tayside into that to the Unscheduled Care Collaborative nationally, which is part of the Scottish Government reporting framework. So there is a suite of measures that we're asked to report on there, which obviously is focused on the reduction and eradication, hopefully, of delayed discharges across the system, but it's focused on improvement measures, specifically around the planned day of discharge rollout, the increase of morning discharges and the increase of weekend discharges, so discharging across 7 days. So efficiency measures to try to improve discharge planning and therefore improve the delayed discharge rate overall across Tayside. So there's some of the governance measures that we have in place locally, just as an assurance for the committee. And if we move on to point 5, that gives us some graphing information about the complex delays currently in Tayside, and you'll see that we've split them by age. So our position for the over 75 age group remains as it always has. The majority of our delays in that elderly age group are as a result of adults with incapacity, so delays associated with the need for guardianship orders to remove people from hospital into care homes. Now, we've seen quite a sharp increase in those numbers in the last year, and that is predominantly because we have more people, unfortunately, leaving hospital and going directly to care homes, where in the past we've had a social care model that has enabled us to actually take the person home and complete their assessment in their own home setting. So what we know from the evidence is that when people are assessed at home, the majority of them actually manage to remain at home independently, which is an indication of the poor quality and the risk aversion that takes place in hospital settings. Unfortunately, much of what I'm reporting today is as a result of our increased demand and the inability of social care to match that demand over time. So we have a higher number of people who are going to care homes straight from hospital, which is completely inconsistent with the strategic direction that we want to take, but is a bit of a necessity at the moment, unfortunately. And as a result of that, we have a higher than average rate of EWI orders being required because of people's lack of capacity to make those decisions. So that's a sort of very simplistic explanation of why you've seen that sharp rise in AWI delays for the over 75 age group. There are a small but slightly increasing number of non-AWI complex reasons for delays in that age group, and they are predominantly the growing numbers of people who have cognitive impairment, alcohol-related brain injury, etc., but complex behavioural issues that are increasingly difficult for even our most specialist care homes to work with, and therefore we have a few people in the system who cannot be placed anywhere because none of the local facilities are able to actually meet their needs. So that accounts for the orange that you see on those graphs in chart 1. Small number but significant levels of delay in terms of bed days lost for those people. So probably a commissioning issue for us for the future. In terms of chart 2, which is the younger age group with complex delays, that's the 18 to 74 age group, you see that the colours are completely reversed. So the orange part of the chart reflects those adults who are delayed for complex reasons that are not to do with AWI. And that, as I say, as you look along the chart, has always been the case. And that reflects the high number of people who continue to remain mainly in our outlying non-acute hospitals like Carsview, Murray Royal, etc., the psychiatric hospitals, people who fit into the mental health and learning disability categories, for whom there is currently no specialist accommodation or a lack of specialised support to meet their needs. There is a commissioning plan in place, and we've reflected that in the narrative. Most of the people now who are delayed for these reasons have actually got a plan and an accommodation that is almost available for them. Those building plans have been and have continued to be delayed as a result of post-COVID delays in building works, but the social care specialist requirements continue to be a commissioning problem in terms of availability of that specialist support. So that really accounts for the majority of the complex delays in that younger age group. We then move on to standard delays. So in terms of chart 3, we'll see that most of the delays are associated with the unavailability of social care, as I said. That has again sharply increased over the last year. Post-pandemic, we have seen a real difficulty in recruitment into social care. That is beginning to pick up, and this all sounds very doom and gloom, but I do have a bit of more positive news in terms of our improvement work as we work towards the end of the report. So really, predominantly all of our non-complex delays can be attributed almost entirely to the lack of social care. And that's due to the unavailability of staff to fill posts. So we have a large proportion of unfilled posts at the moment, and constant recruitment, but still very, very slow. We should note also that there is a lot of narrative around the lack of availability of social care. However, we do note that there has been an approximate 20% increase in the rate of referrals into social care. So post-pandemic, we're seeing a higher number of people being referred, and all of those people have a significantly higher level of frailty. Now, we don't know yet why that is, but we can make some assumptions that the quietness of NHS admissions during COVID, when everyone stayed at home, has resulted in a huge spike in frailty of that older population, as we now pay the price for them not being appropriately looked after and supported during that period. So although we do have a real difficulty in recruitment into social care, it has to be seen as well in the context of much, much higher levels of demand at a time when we're struggling to recruit. We move on to chart 8, just to turn the tables a bit in terms of our discharge without delay work stream, which I'm leading for nationally for Tayside. Actually, although our delayed discharges are very high at the moment, we continue to sustain an approximate 97% rate of discharges without delay across the system in Tayside. So that will go some way to showing you that actually the vast majority of people are discharged without delay. And although our delay figures are very high, they actually constitute a very small proportion of the activity which goes on a day-to-day basis and is very positive across NHS Tayside. So just again, a little bit of context. Some of the improvement work we're doing around there relates to the rollout of our planned date of discharge policy, which we've seconded a member of staff to lead on, and that's across every hospital in Tayside. We've received money from our Unscheduled Care Board to install e-whiteboards in every ward area in Tayside, and the member of staff is working with wards, senior nursing staff, and with our local discharge teams to make sure that good discharge planning practice and policy is in place to support the work of an MDT to work towards an agreed date and therefore minimise the amount of people who become delayed due to lack of communication. So lots of work going on around there. There are some graphs, I won't go into the detail, we will take questions, but there are graphs there showing some of the trends around particularly medicine for the elderly, and showing that some of our local trajectories that we've set for ourselves. So for instance, chart 9, 94% of our discharges for the 65+ age group were without delay. So our local target, which very ambitiously we've set at 98%, we're very close to that and actually performing very well for the majority of patients that we see. And just to go over some of the improvement measures that we have in place. So in the community, we have a locality modelling programme going on, which will begin to form multi-professional teams to reduce some of the silo working that we see, and hopefully work more closely with our GP clusters in geographical areas. So again, about reducing inefficiency and through co-location and multidisciplinary working, becoming more efficient. We have now, based on what some of you may be familiar with as our Hospital at Home DEXA service and our ECS Enhanced Nursing Service, we are now developing what we're calling the Dundee Enhanced Care at Home team, DECAT, which will bring many of those urgent care services together into a multidisciplinary team with a far more simplified referral pathway for GPs, which allows people to be referred into a single point of contact, triaged by a senior nurse and routed to the right place with the right skill level of professional. So again, multiple referral pathways were leading to the wrong assessments being undertaken in the wrong place by the wrong people. So just about streamlining some of those services and creating much closer links with the acute hospital and in particular the front door area of the hospital, so that we could develop a whole system frailty pathway, particularly for older people, but beginning to look at branching out into adults as well, but starting with our very large, frail, older population. So that's been a major development for us and is a work in progress. We, I think, probably have reported before that we've now fully embedded the social care eligibility criteria, which means that only critical and substantial levels of need are being seen as a reason for delay in hospital, so a far more stringent scrutiny. We've got an 8-bedded unit within Turriff House, which is specifically to support step down and step up care for people with more specialised mental health issues associated with older age. And we have a care home team also who are trying to provide as much as possible urgent care services for people to prevent admission to hospital from care homes. So these are just some of the improvements. The most significant one, I think, in terms of what our next report to PAC will demonstrate is the start of our Discharge to Assess service. This is a service we had up until a year ago, provided by British Red Cross, that worked very well in terms of working to complete people's assessments at home. Unfortunately, for contractual and pandemic reasons, we lost that service over the last year, but have just, as of the 1st of November, entered into a new test with British Red Cross, where a member of staff from there will work very closely in the hospital setting to begin to take people out of the hospital and complete their assessment at home again. So we should begin to see the reduction of both complex and non-complex delays. I've seen already, unfortunately, too late for this report, but this week we've seen quite a significant reduction in our RAG status in terms of delays, just because that work has started. So what I'm hopeful of is that over the next 2 to 3 weeks, our delay position will significantly reduce as this service becomes embedded and we begin to discharge people earlier back into their own home settings. Again, all dependent on recruitment, but recruitment in social care is beginning to pick up slightly, and with the improvement measures and the streamlining of our use of social care alongside other things like tech and the voluntary sector, we're hopeful that we are about to see quite a significant improvement, which unfortunately is not recorded in this report, but when we bring back our next report, we should be able to demonstrate. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much for that. I'm encouraged by what you're saying about increasing levels of recruitment, because that's the first time I've heard anyone say that. So hopefully there's an upturn there. One thing in particular I'm interested in is that people who are in hospital and shouldn't be there, delayed discharge. In many cases, well, I don't know in many cases, but certainly in some cases, the report makes clear that they are being offered placements in residential homes. And clearly we wouldn't be offering that if we didn't think it was appropriate, but people shouldn't be voting with their feet and saying there's no way my relative's going to a care home. Why do you think that is?
We have placed a significant number of people actually in interims. I think in the region of about 100 people over a year. But that's always been on a choice basis. That was on the basis of government advice to deal with post-pandemic pressures. So it's put to people as an alternative to waiting in hospital for a care package. The outcomes we know for people who go to residential care are likely to be poorer than they will be if the person gets home. So it's not something that we consider lightly. But lots of people, to go back to your question, is that lots of people are refusing that because they adamantly want to be at home in their own places of residence, and because they know that they're able to do that. So I think for most people, even those who are assessed as requiring care home admission, that's not something that they generally, it's not something that they want to do. They would always wish to be in their own homes.
I hear you said that the outcomes are better for people who go home that are into care homes, but are the outcomes in care homes better than remaining in hospital? Is there any way of gauging that?
I'm not sure if there's evidence around that, but the clinical evidence we have around prolonged stays in hospitals demonstrate the very poor outcomes for people in terms of the deterioration in their psychological, physiological, emotional well-being. Now, we know that the loss of independence in any institutional setting is not a good thing. However, there is an increased sense of, what's the word I would like, depersonalisation in a hospital, institutionalisation, that comes from being in a ward area, in hospital pyjamas, etc., and loss of identity. And certainly in a care home, although it's institutional, there is far more of an individualised care plan, single room, ensuite. So I would suggest that it's a better outcome than a hospital stay, and that's certainly what we would put to service users. But service users and their families still obviously have the right to make that choice. I
agree. And just one more thing quickly that I picked up. You were talking about the unavailability of specialist accommodation in some cases, which leads to a delayed discharge. And one of the things that he mentioned was alcohol-related brain damage. And I'm bringing that up because there was a specialist unit to the north of the Kingsway, which I got involved in at the time because local residents were kicking up a fuss basically because they didn't want people with alcohol problems in their area. But it did open and seemed to run well. But I hear that has closed. I wonder if anyone could comment on that. And has it closed because we have something more suitable available? Or is there still somewhere for people to go with alcohol-related brain damage if they're delayed in hospital?
The people with ARBD that I'm referring to in my report would tend to be in the much older age category. So I think Priory Court that you referred to is probably not. It's probably not a suitable unit for the people who I'm referring to. Many of whom, Jenny wants to come in. Many of whom will end up perhaps in our Kingsway Care Centre or living in the community as a result of very long-term alcohol misuse throughout a lifespan, which results in an older person with very complex mental health issues associated to their alcohol use. So it's quite a different category of people from the people who would perhaps sit within the younger alcohol and substance misuse categories who would have used Priory Court.
Yeah, I can see that. Thanks. Jenny, you want to come in?
Yeah, it was largely to say what Lynn's just said, actually, and then to add to that there is a group that's been formed across the various partners across Tayside looking at ARBI, trying to get much earlier interventions in the pathway, but also looking at, as Lynn says, we have a group of people that are ending up in Kingsway that are relatively young, extremely complex needs. So ideally trying to prevent that outcome of getting to that point where really you can't go back and kind of improve the damage that's been done, but also looking at the longer term pathways for those people.
Thank you. Is there anyone else has a question or comment to make on this paper? I see no hands, so thank you for your input there, Lynn. Very interesting, and onwards and upwards.
Sorry, Ken, I was late putting my hand up. I'm sorry.
Your hand isn't up at all, Dorothy.
Oh, sorry.
Do you know how to do it? Yeah.
I thought I put my wee yellow hand up.
No,
I've
you
not
didn't.
done
But
it.
carry on. No,
You
it's not a
did,
problem.
Dorothy, but then you took it down.
All right, I probably clicked twice instead of once. Technology. Okay, I have a few wee questions, but mostly relate to my inability to decipher the charts. Sorry about this, but I need some support here.
Right.
The first chart, chart 1, appears on my printed version in grey, but I believe there's colours here, which I can't decipher. But my question is, I'm trying to work out numbers of people, and I'm not able to read the chart and work out numbers of people. Is that because it's not given in the chart, or am I just not understanding what I'm looking at?
No, it is given in the chart, I suppose.
Right, okay.
Just on chart 1, just to give you an example, our current position is that adults with incapacity, that's the over 75 age group, we're currently sitting at, oh no, Lindsay, these are not numbers, are they? That you're sorry.
They are numbers.
Okay. So we're talking about, is that 16? Throughout the year 22, 23, 16 AWI delays and probably 1 or 2 in the other code 9 areas.
Right. Okay. So the 0 to 30 at the left hand side is numbers, is the numbers of people. Okay, that's fine. Now, how do I decipher then? In chart 2, I can see the colours. I can see blue and orange. So if in the first column, which is Q2 16-17, we've got a wee bit of blue and a bigger bit of orange. Tell me how those numbers work.
So the total, so the blues, which are the adults with incapacity, and the orange, which are the code 9 reasons, both of them added together give 22. We don't have the actual breakdown shown because it would make the chart quite clumsy, but we could in future work out a way to add them. So the colours are just giving you a rough proportion, so you could see that most of the discharges are relating to code 9, and it's just to show you the trend visually. Right. So we haven't given you the actual breakdown, but maybe we should in the future.
Right. And you know what would be useful? It would be that to actually show the number, because well, how many of the blue is the total is 22, but how much of that is the blue and how much of that is the orange? That's not clear to me. I know the orange is more than the blue, but
yeah, I mean that's information that we certainly have. And as an assurance, obviously, we're looking at this in the most granular of detail on a daily basis. So we, you know, in terms of myself and others who scrutinise this and manage it, we would know not only the absolute figure every day, but we would know the names and the people and their situations. So it's certainly something that we can give you more clarity of information on, but to reassure you that we are looking at this in granular detail every day.
Okay, what I should perhaps do is in advance of the next meeting, if I'm not sure about the numbers, I should ring you up and say what the numbers here. Have one wee question relates to what you were talking about earlier. You know, if people are delayed in hospital because they're waiting for a care package, do some go home without a care package?
Sometimes people do. What we try to do is have a really good, robust, multidisciplinary conversation with the patient and their family to look at all of the options and the pitfalls, etc. So similarly to looking at interim care placements, we would try to have a very honest conversation about, at the moment, we're really struggling with social care. And so there may be a significant wait. Now, hopefully that conversation will change and become more positive in the next couple of weeks. But at the moment, people are balancing the risk of remaining in hospital and the unhappiness of remaining in hospital. against what, for instance, their families can do in the relatively short term to support them to get home. So that's quite a complex and carefully managed conversation that needs to take place with each patient. So
but
yes, some people do go home. Unfortunately, at the moment, because of the problems we've had with social care, the difficulty is that we can't guarantee the timescales. So that really is a risk that families and service users have to weigh up based on their ability to cope and the length of time that they may be asked to do so.
Do we know the extent of that? You know, how many will elect to go home?
Oh, I don't have that figure to hand, but I could probably find that out.
But is it tracked at all or recorded? It will be recorded that people will choose to go home to wait for a care package.
It is recorded. I'm not sure if we're tracking it. I can find that out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sam, would you like to come in?
Yeah, Lynn, thank you for the detailed work. My question was just simply, how big impact do you see the enhanced care at home team having?
The community enhanced care at home team?
Yes.
Yep,
How
so
big impact do you think they'll...
Those services already exist, so it's important to note that these are not new services, but this is about a realignment and a more seamless way of working. So I suppose if I give you the context that in the past each of those individual teams worked as a silo, and what we've tried to do is realign the teams around the patient's experience rather than around their own team experience. That the idea is that will enable good conversations to take place about where is the right place to manage that patient's care. So we would hope that will begin to see fewer presentations at the front door of the hospital because we'll be more robust in supporting people to remain at home. The numbers coming through ECS are already very high. But what we don't have and we're developing is that communication between our ED and our admissions wards and our frailty teams inpatient-wise to communicate across a whole patient pathway. So there's lots of work going on, for instance, around having the same geriatrician manage a patient's care across both our hospital, acute and community sites so that we have a more consistent approach to patient care and the same virtual team of professionals looking after that patient and managed around a GP cluster. So all of this is about supporting more people to remain at home because we know that the evidence tells us, particularly for older, frail people, home is absolutely where they'll have the best outcomes. Yeah. So it remains to be seen. I think we will continue to have real challenges around our frail older population. But the aim is that not only will more people flow through that service, but that they'll actually have better outcomes as a result. Crucially, our Discharge to Assess service that I talked about that we've commissioned with Red Cross is also positioned to try to support those people. So when they're having an acute period of illness in the community, sometimes just for a few days, wraparound care is enough to allay family anxieties and keep that person at home. So we've tried to position that service in a way that supports community care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
Ken, could I just say a huge number of excellent initiatives going on here. You know, good work. It's really impressive. Thank you for all that you do.
Yep, and it's a really complex matter to try and manage delayed discharge, and I really appreciate all the work you do. I'm sure everyone else does. I know Dorothy does. So that item's for noting. So can we move on, please?
Item 8 is the Clinical Care and Professional Governance Assurance Report. It's for noting and assurance purposes.
Do we have anyone? Yeah, hi, Matthew.
Hi there, Kenny. I'm happy to speak to this one. So this governance report has been put through and we're offering a level of assurance of reasonable. And we've detailed that this time in a little bit more detail in terms of we feel that there's evidence of a sound system of governance throughout the partnership. The identification of risk and subsequent management of risk is articulated well throughout the majority of services. We do feel that there's ongoing scope for improvement across a range of services in relation to the governance processes, although this is currently inextricably linked to the ongoing difficulties with recruitment and retention of staff. And there is some evidence of non-compliance relating to a fully comprehensive governance system across some teams. And an example of that would be contemporary management of adverse events and risks. I'm happy to sort of go into more detail around that in due course. Excuse me. I'll take us down to section 5, the assessment. I'm not going to go too much detail around this because I think the previous reports that we've heard, and Diane certainly speaking about our Dundee Drug and Alcohol Services identified that they still sit in the top 5 risks within the partnership, but there's significant work that's ongoing to address that and support that. And we've had some conversations about that. I will say though that a senior service manager role has now been appointed into that service to sit between Diane and the 2 managers that we've got. So that will certainly start to provide a degree of senior leadership that's needed from that operational perspective as well. And while the nursing staff, as Dan has alluded to, is showing an improving picture at the moment, that can be quite cyclical. So we'll continue to monitor that, but there is a concern ongoing with medical staffing. At A3, it's just to sort of touch on, this is probably an emerging risk, but it is it's the 6th highest risk that we've got in terms of the district nurses and the availability of district nurses. Right now, we're okay and we're delivering the service, but we've had 3 people submit their intent to retire in March 23. And with the number of district nurses that we've got and the number of trainee district nurses that we've got in place, there's a potential risk that if we don't continue to support the trainee district nurses getting to full district nurse level and the people retire, that we will really struggle for senior leadership in and around the district nursing team. There's a lot in place. We are confident that we can continue to manage that and it won't become a bigger risk, but it's there as an early warning, I suppose, in terms of a risk that might develop into 23. A4 talks about the staff resource. I think every paper we've had alludes to the difficulties we've got with staffing, so I won't labour that point. I will, though, have a state that the Director of Psychology post has gone through, I think, 3 or 4 rounds now of interview, and they're still not able to recruit to that post. So that's a very senior post that we're not able to secure an applicant for at this time. Our clinical and care governance arrangements are detailed in the appendix, which I won't go through. Just to say within the forum, where we had some really good broad discussions through exception reports from a wide range of services, but also a masterclass from our infection control colleagues on how to report most comprehensively in and around infection prevention and control issues. And that was really well received by our teams. Our forum is our clinical care and professional governance group, which is aimed at education as well as a degree of assurance. We're also doing work around our lead partner services. So these are hosted services. Through our internal audit reports, it's been highlighted that the way that we're providing assurance across Tayside to Angus to Perth and from them to ourselves could be strengthened. So we've started some work where we're working very closely with our lead agency partner services to make sure that we're providing the levels of assurance into both Angus and Perth governance groups as well, and they're doing the same down to us. Well, that's the ambition. That's where we're aiming to go. The adverse event management is a fairly big section in the report. I'm not going to talk to it in any detail. There are no major concerns. All the information is there so that we're being transparent in terms of the adverse events that are coming through, but I'd be happy to sort of pick up any queries that people have got throughout that section. In terms of management of the adverse event systems, I'm down at section C8 and C9. Our overdue verified events and our overdue unverified events are showing some improvement, but it's minimal. And I think that links into the number of staff that are available to do that, particularly the retrospective work with the overdue verified events. But it is moving in the right direction. We are monitoring that. It's not a big concern for us, but it's something that we recognise absolutely needs to be done. And I just wanted to mention pressure ulcers. There's a spike for the August data in terms of the number of pressure ulcers that have developed in the community. So we've had a review of those, and all of those have been reported into the partnership from other parts of the system, sometimes from care homes, sometimes from people being supported in different environments. And we've done some work with our partners there to try and make sure that we've got better communication links, earlier referral pathways, so that we can make sure that we're made aware and our specialist teams can support those pressure ulcers as early as possible within the pathway. Our complaints data continues to be variable, but is showing a slightly improving position. We have set up a 2-weekly meeting now, a fortnightly meeting that we have with the complaints team, so that we can get support to stay on top of those as best we can. And that is starting to show some improvement, particularly around our areas like mental health and dirty drug and alcohol service, who have a greater number of complaints. So that is improving, but there is still room for further improvement. Put a couple of compliments in from our services at Roxburgh House, which is palliative care, and the Corner, which is a health and wellbeing service for young people. I just think it's nice to balance sometimes the complaints and the compliments. So it's really nice to see, particularly the Corner. I have to say, I read through the full report that they provided, and the comments that came through and the level of support and comfort that the patients that were using that were able to describe was really quite positive and warming. And then just finally, I'll put some data in around mental health services, just to give an indication, I suppose, of the increasing demand that's being placed on the service, and demonstrating how our ability to meet that demand is reducing in terms of the number of patients that we're able to see month on month. And there are some figures in there about pre and post COVID figures and how the COVID impact has increased the number of referrals coming through. So I'll pause there. I appreciate there's a lot more information in the report, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions.
Yeah, there is a lot of information in the report, and it's very, very interesting, and thanks for talking us through it. And you know, one of the themes which is woven within this report, and it's everywhere else as well, is of course about staffing levels. And you know, district nurses, for example, could be down to 7 from a whole-time equivalent of 23. But you know, there are mitigating actions being taken to try and sort all these issues out. So I hope they are successful. Does anyone have any questions? Put your wee yellow hand up if you do. No, I don't think so. Well, thanks very much. I think I would be persuaded to have a reasonable level of oh no, there's 2 hands up. People are coming in very late. I may have to rule this out. But on this occasion, Dorothy, and then Martin, please.
Oh, it worked. I was beginning to think my wee hand thing wasn't working. Could you explain to me, Matthew, this is a good report. I like your charts. Lots of your charts have got numbers on them, and I like numbers. Unverified events. What is an unverified event?
Sure. So when an event occurs, any member of staff can go into the system and record that within our Datix system. That would remain unverified until a senior manager had gone in, had a look at the incident, and then verified it. So they look at the incident, they check the detail of the incident, and then they start to manage it. So then that should be done within 72 hours. So that's the standard that we work to there. So it's just somebody going and having a look at the incident, verifying it, and then moving it through the system.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that, Ken. Just to say that this was one of the best reports I've seen for quite some time for the data and how it's been presented. I do wish to comment on the tables on H3. The data is a bit clumped up. It's a little bit blurred in the versions that have been attached into the papers. So just to suggest that some better quality copies of them be placed in future papers. But that's just a quick comment on that.
Sorry, Martin, which sections were they?
H3, Hotel 3, on page 56.
It's mental health data, Matthew.
Yeah, 56.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
just a little bit fuzzy, but unclear. Just a style point rather than anything substantial.
Yeah, no, I'll take that point, and I agree with you, Martin. They're actually copies of information that I've got rather than the original data. So I think if we include those in the future, I'll try and get the original data, which we can then manipulate much more easily. Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. Will do.
Thank you.
Turn my mic off there, sorry. So I think that's us finished with this item, and thanks again for a really good, readable, very readable, easy to understand without being dumbed down. Really good report. Thank you, and I think that was just for noting, isn't it? Yeah, and for assurance. Are we agreed that we have a reasonable level of assurance as a result of this report? Yep, thank you.
Yes.
Next item, please.
Item 9, quarterly complaints performance, second quarter 2022-23.
Right, well, we didn't have any, so next item. Joke. We did. Well, I had a few. Sorry, not funny. This has been recorded. Not funny.
Chair, I'll pass on to Claire Lewis-Robertson, who's going to take us through this report.
Thank you. I've just noticed an error in the first paragraph, which does say it's for the first quarter, but in the title, this is for the second quarter. And this data is about closed complaints data that we have. So this is based on the closed complaint data. So hopefully we have enough closed complaints to kind of give an accurate picture. I'd like to draw your attention to 4.4, which is the total number of complaints that we've received, and it's a slight increase for health, but it remains relatively stable compared to previous quarters, and a slight decrease for social work complaints. In 4.5, complaints closed within timescales. We've got the health social work complaints, but 2/3 are closed within timescales, and health with about half of the complaints are closed within timescales. And in table 4.11, which takes us to the open complaints, we've got social work being recorded as one that's over 180 days old, but actually that has been closed now. And I'm looking at our current open complaints that I have access to and that you do not. But that has come down. So that's the longest number of open complaints that we have for a snapshot.
Martin, your hand's up. Would you like to come in, please?
Thanks, Chair. On the complaints that are closed, are they closed successfully in terms of the person making the complaint has received a successful conclusion or not? I'm trying to read through, and I'm just trying. My brain's having a bit of a brain freeze at the moment.
So there's if we look at the upheld complaints, which is in section 4.9, that's about complaint outcomes. Mm-hmm. So for where we uphold a complaint, that's where we agree with the person making the complaint and say, yes, there has been an issue, and these are the actions that we're going to take to resolve that for you. So you can see that actually for health, that was only 3 that were upheld, but actually for the partially upheld, where some elements of the complaint we agree there was a reason to complain about, that's 19. So that does really kind of fluctuate in terms of what the complaint was about, but that gives you an idea of generally in terms of if people do not come back to us after the complaint outcome, then they'll have received the full outcome letter detailing all the issues that were looked into, and they are advised that if they still remain unsatisfied, they can go to the SPSO. So the numbers of complainants that we have then approaching the SPSO really is very small compared to the number of complaints that we deal with.
Cool, thanks for that.
Yep, Dorothy?
Just a quick question then on that, Claire. Is there anywhere that shows the percentage of upheld complaints in relation to the total number of complaints?
That's a good question, and I'm just going to look at so I can see that from that upheld complaints table in 4.9, and then there isn't one underneath that. I'm just looking to see in the appendix, which has all the categories that the SPSO require us to report on. I'm sure it will be there somewhere because Cheryl goes into so yes, there is in the sections 3. It tells you the number of complaints upheld for social.
Oh, the percentage. Yes, I see it.
Percentage. Yeah, so that's in the appendix there.
Thank you.
Yes, Sam. Sam Riddle.
Claire, it's just from my own background, when you say health complaints, does that include complaints to GP practices?
Some GP practices that we're responsible for.
Oh, so it's just the right. So
It'll be
it's not all
two
GP
C practices, yeah.
That thanks to that.
Yeah, I was obviously joking at the start when I said there had been no complaints, but if you look at point 5, there was no complaints about the integration joint board, so I was partially right, but that's maybe more to do with the fact that people just go to the actual provider of the service.
We've never received a complaint about a decision. It's about the decision that the IJB's make.
I see. So there is scope for complaints then, yeah.
Or potentially some technical aspect of the IJB. But we've never received a complaint about the IJB.
Well, there's always a first time. I hope it's not soon.
Now you've highlighted it, maybe.
But overall, yes, it's always interesting to see the complaints performance, and when you consider the thousands and thousands of people who receive a service from the partnership, they're relatively small numbers, but it's important that we take this seriously. Sam, is your hand up again, or is that a legacy? Legacy, maybe.
Well, that's an old hand.
An old hand, right? Good way of putting it. I've lowered it. So yeah, thanks very much for that. I don't think we need to dwell on that any further, and it's obviously for noting. So thanks very much for talking us through that, Claire. Now, I am wondering if at some point we will need to take a break. I'm wondering how people feel about maybe having a 10-minute break now. I think the second half won't take as long as the first half, and I know that maybe some people have to go off to other meetings, so I don't see that as being a problem as long as we have the relevant people here to speak to the papers that are still to come. So can we have 10 minutes from now then? Get back about 11:55, if that's all right. I'm sorry if that messes people's day up a wee bit, but we have been talking for quite a while, and it's best practice really to move around. So thank you. See you in 10 minutes. Back to business. We're on the home straight now. If I can just bring up the agenda and ask Arlene, sorry, Arlene, to proceed.
Okay, so we're now on item 10, which is the Strategic Risk Register update, and this is for noting.
Okay.
I was going to introduce this one as well, Ken.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Go ahead.
So to highlight, there has been very little movement on the Strategic Risk Register. The 3 top risks, highest scoring risks, are staff resource, the Dundee Drug and Alcohol Recovery Service, and the National Care Service. So we updated the risk register on Pentana at the end of October, and we've included in the DDAS risk the factors around the implementation of the MAT standards, and reference that they're included in the ADP risk register. Else is there? The category 1 responder risk has decreased because the category 1 responder action plan was presented and approved by the AGB in October. An emergent risk we're considering is the potential nationwide power outages. That's not on the risk register yet, and it may be. We're scoping that at the moment. Further works were still ongoing on the Pentana risk management system. We're getting the strategic plan onto Pentana, and we're going to be linking that with the strategic risk register and also the performance indicators, and the documents supporting that will be added as links onto the strategic on the risk register, so you'd be able to see the control factors, and that would take you straight there. So we haven't completed that piece of work yet. We're looking to kind of build up resilience in staff that are working on Pentana within the Health and Social Care Partnership as well. And when we have that piece of work completed, we will be giving the IJB members access to Pentana, so you've got that. But we haven't completed the work to make it worthwhile for you at the moment. I think that's all I'd like to say. If anybody's got questions.
Sounds like a fast car, Pentana. I don't know what it is, but I see that at 7.6 we are going to have familiarisation sessions planned for members, so that'll be useful. Are there any questions on this report? Martin first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to ask on item 6.4 about the power outages planning, what sort of mitigating actions are you contemplating, and are you looking at how's the cost of that going to be it's going to be met by the budgets?
I think Diane might be best placed to talk about that.
I'm likely to be able to give the issue about the budgets, Martin, because to be honest, I've not had to think about it. But from a Dundee City Council point of view, first of all, there's already a working group that's been set up to look at what the implication of the potential power outages might be, how we would mitigate against that, and how we actually know where the areas will be prior to it. So we understand we'll get notice of where those power outages will be, and we're looking at it currently from a geographical position. So certain postcodes at certain times in order to spread that around. So working group has started. We discussed this yesterday at the Health and Safety Management Group within the Health and Social Care Partnership, and one of our colleagues from NH&SCP side is going to go back into NH&SCP side to have a discussion around the premises which are currently kind of managed through NH&SCP side as opposed to Dundee City Council. So work started. We are looking at mitigation. A number of kind of key places will have generators which can kick in at the point that that's happening, but we'll be doing a risk assessment around that.
Dave, do you want to add to that?
Can I just comment on the financial side of things? There should be no financial risk to the IGB as a result of this, because we don't own any of the premises, so it will be kind of sitting with the partner bodies to if there's any sort of additional funding for that required. Cool.
Thank you for that reassurance, because it is, as people know, it's been a big issue in the press for the last couple of months, and it's something which the documents relating to which areas are getting cut off and at which sort of periods is already starting to go out, and people are starting to see where these power outages could be and how long they could be. And it's concerning a lot of people, because I know it's concerning a number of carers across the city who have got electrical equipment in their homes who are supporting people with complex medical issues, and they are concerned about how this is going to how this is going to impact on their lives, whether they're going to have to move them into a care facility or move them to a building that has the power available.
Chair, if I can just respond, that was part of the conversation and discussion, Martin. So we'll need to be doing individual risk assessments as well as collective risk assessments around premises. For most people, they will have some sort of backup, but not everyone. So we need to just be really clear about how we do that assessment and what that looks like. So absolutely, those are the factors that are being taken into account.
I think Jenny's wanting to come in on this as well.
Very quickly, Martin, it's just we already have business continuity plans around power outages because it's something that could happen at any point for a number of reasons. So those plans are in place across our services. The difference this time, I suppose, is we may well have kind of planned and predicted outages.
Thank you. Dorothy's up next.
Thank you. And first of all, I'm grateful to Dave for the additional information that he sent me on how risks are scored. I'm looking at the strategic risk profile for November, and I understand now that the red, or is it red, means it's almost certain. This is an almost certain risk. And under control factors, these are mitigations, Dave. Yes, these are the kind of things that we've put in place to mitigate. Now, there's quite a lot of almost certains, which is quite concerning. I've read, I mean, I understand, and we've discussed already this morning, you know, the reasons for some of these, but it's useful to have this table with the colour coding, you know, to highlight where these issues are. But thank you for the information that you gave me. I'm almost there.
Yep. No need to apologise there. I'm not sure you did apologise actually, but if you did, there was no need, because it's quite a complex thing to work through. Is there any other comments? No. And that was for noting as well. So can we move on, please? Unless I've missed anyone. No.
Move on now to item
Yes,
11.
please.
adult weight management, and this is for noting.
I'm happy to speak to that one, if that's okay, Chair. I've got Linda McGrath, who's only just come onto screen there, who's the service manager for this service as well, who may be best placed to answer any operational clinical questions that might be presented. So this report has been brought following the adult weight management being identified as one of the top 5 risks in the partnership on a previous clinical care and professional governance report. Pat requested a little bit more information about the service, the waiting times, and how we were managing those. The adult weight management service is a Tayside-wide service. Dietetics are hosted within Dundee. So I've tried to talk about Dundee and some of the Dundee issues, but a lot of the figures will be Tayside-wide. A little bit of background. We know that obesity is a fairly significant problem. The last full year data that we've got for primary 1-age children, we showed that 13.5% of those were at risk of becoming overweight and 11.3% were at risk of obesity. That data is from 18-19. The 22-23 data is currently being collated. So it will be really interesting to see what impacts COVID perhaps has had in the intervening years on those figures. But clearly that's a worrying position for us to start from. What we also know is that 63% of Scottish females and 69% of Scottish males are either overweight or obese. And obesity is strongly correlated with deprivation and associated comorbidities. So there's quite a bit of background there that says that we've got the potential for a fair bit of obesity in and around particularly Dundee, but also other areas of Tayside as well. A lot of the narrative through this paper talks about diabetes and type 2 diabetes. And over the last 10 years, there's been a fairly significant increase in type 2 diabetes across Tayside. But there has been recent evidence from primary care-based randomised controlled trials that demonstrate that a large portion of people can achieve durable diabetes remission if they lose and maintain sufficient weight loss. But crucially, that needs to be done in the first 6 years of diagnosis. So there's a lot of work that's detailed through here about early identification, early intervention and management of diabetes as well, which is strongly correlated to obesity. One other point in terms of the background, at the moment there are 1,100 pieces of equipment from our equipment store in Dundee that are supporting people who are overweight. And that includes beds, chairs, stools, walking aids, showering aids. So there's also a cost there in terms of the finances, because those pieces of equipment cost more than the standard equipment would be there as well. So the waiting times pre-pandemic, we had 250 people on the waiting list. And at that time, I have to say, we were a little bit concerned and were starting to do work around this waiting list. Post-pandemic, and at the moment, we're sitting at a list of somewhere in the region of 1,500 people. So that's a significant increase that we've had. The referrals throughout the pandemic have increased. 2019, there were just over 400. 2020, that dropped to 360, presumably as a result of the pandemic. But in 2021, that jumped to 940, and this year, up to October, 1,250 or thereabouts. So a significant increase in the number of referrals coming into the service. Our current waits, the average waits, are approximately 215 days. The longest wait, as it stands at the moment, is 599 days. So they're quite significant in terms of the waits. Obviously, we think COVID will have had a fairly significant impact on the current position that we've got in terms of the impact on people's health, but also in terms of the lockdown and the reduction in physical activity that people will have had, and then the associated reduction in physical and increase in psychological impact that will have had on people. And we heard Dan talk earlier about people maybe turning to drink. Some people, of course, will turn to food when they're in the house alone. The cost of living crisis that we've got now as well will lead people maybe to make choices for cheaper food, and cheaper food often isn't the most nutritious food. So we've got this problem coming at us from a whole range of different areas. So a little bit about the service. We operate on 4 tiers within the service. Our service is tier 3. Tier 1 is very much a universal prevention. So I suppose that's the public health approach. That's the information that's out there, that's freely available, that we would direct people to in the early when we've got an early identification of weight becoming a problem. And that's where we'd ask people to self-manage. Tier 2 is where there's a little bit more targeted support. I suppose the easiest way of describing that would be maybe Scottish Slimmers, something like that. So you've got some professionals that provide some support, taking you through a programme, but it's not delivered by specialist professionals. Tier 3 is the service that we provide, and that's where we've got specialist professionals like dietitians, physiotherapists, psychologists, exercise specialists who take people through the required intervention that they might need. And then Tier 4 relates to bariatric surgery. So one of our dietitians works very closely in the bariatric surgery team for those people that need that level of intervention as well. So early in 2020, when we sort of recognised that potentially there was a problem, we really just delivered a Tier 3 service as a 12-month programme in a group that was delivered face-to-face and provided support to bariatric surgery. Since that time, I have to say, through the pandemic, so Linda and her team have done a power of work through very, very challenging times. The service was completely stopped at the early stages of the pandemic. All of the dietitians that delivered this service were redirected into acute care because at that time we didn't know what the pandemic would throw at us and we didn't know where the dietitians would be needed, but we felt they would be needed in acute. As soon as we were able to return them into community services to start picking up these services, but obviously limitations have been placed onto the physical distancing, access to some of the places where they would deliver those. But a range of services have been developed over that time, and they're detailed through the report. And I'm not going to go into any in detail, but I appreciate we can have conversations about those. So we still think it's important to deliver face-to-face sessions where we can. Some people don't use digital, don't want to, or can't use digital. So we feel face-to-face is still important in some ways. But we are expanding our use of digital systems wherever we can. So we want to deliver groups digitally. We've got digital programs that are being delivered. So that's the company called Aviva, who actually provide support and advice to people and take them through a program where they support people through. And we've got a series of apps so that people get a level of support and a level of continued support, which comes and is delivered sort of via apps. There's a heavy focus on education and lifestyle intervention, particularly for those that are newly diagnosed with diabetes and for those that have got pre-diabetes. But of course, education and lifestyle is important for all patients coming through. And although this is I describe this as a Tier 3 service, we've also recognised that on the waiting list, we've got a significant number of people that probably only need a Tier 2 level of intervention. So we've done a lot of work trying to develop alternatives for the Tier 2 services as well. So that's working with Second Nature, which is one of the online digital services, and also things like football fans in training, where local football clubs across the region have worked with our staff to develop skills to be able to provide the right advice and intervention and support for people who want to lose weight. And that's important as well in terms of drawing in men who are less likely to engage with some of the services that traditionally we will provide. So in terms of supporting the waiting times, clearly we've done significant amounts of redesign. We have had some additional funding through our COVID funds from the government. We've had 2 Band 5 posts that have been put into the team. That is temporary, and they will stop once their contracts are finished. The commissioning model, drawing in other ways of delivering the service, which takes that away from our staff, I think is really key. We've spoken many times this morning about the difficulties in recruiting staff. So the commissioning model really supports in terms of providing the right care and support for people, and we're asking our partners to try and deliver some of that. Remodelling of the Tier 3 services has started, will continue in the various tests of change that are ongoing. There's been full implementation of patient-focused booking, which should help in terms of reducing the amount of DNAs in the service, which will make us more efficient. And we're looking at blending the models between face-to-face and digital, following feedback that we've had from the services. We're really keen to do as much as we can digitally because we're able to be more efficient and provide more effective services, but that doesn't work for everybody. So we're trying to make sure that we capture as many people as we can. And we are keen to build on further use of digital solutions where they present and when we've evaluated the ones that we're currently using. So what does the future hold? Well, the waiting list has actually reduced by about 200 from when this paper was written. So we are starting to see some change within that, but we clearly need further analysis and to see what the trends do with regard to the demand, the capacity and the activity, so the DCAEQ work that we'll be doing within the service. There are tests of change still ongoing, which are detailed through the paper, and we'll further analyse these to see where we go. And there are still challenges, so getting back into our full footprint of delivering services within some of the gym spaces, for example, that we don't have access to yet. So we're not out of the woods, But I feel we've got a very good set of measures and services and a team that are up for the challenge, and we're moving in the right direction. But I'm happy to sort of bring back sort of an update report on this in due course when we've had the opportunity to allow things to run. So I'll pause there, and I'm happy to take any queries or questions that people might have.
Thanks very much. Again, very and interesting. Just looking at the programme for people who are newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, it said 700 of them, which is a huge number. The average weight loss is 4.1%. However, if you go to 6.4, the research demonstrates that modest weight loss in the region of 5 to 7% body weight is effective. So that average is below the minimum. How much we could be concerned about that?
Well, I think it's, as we embed the programs and as we work with the programs, we'd like to see that sort of increasing. I suppose that there'll be benefit, regardless of the weight loss that's there, and that's the ideal between the 5 to 7%. I think we just need to keep working with the program, keep working with that. And I suppose we need to keep sort of looking at the research that's coming through within there as well. I don't know, Linda, if there's anything specific around that point that you want to add.
Yes, so that programme is not specifically a weight management programme, it's a diabetes education programme. Okay. And part of the benefits of that is that people do tend to lose weight. So because it's only a 12-week programme and it's not the 12-month programme that the other programmes that we deliver are based on. So that's a difference really. It's about lifestyle and it's about educating primarily patients who've newly been diagnosed with diabetes about their diabetes and the importance of maintaining good health.
Thank you. Dorothy?
Thank you. And another excellent report, Matthew. Page, well, it's marked 83, 7.1, a significant increase in referrals to the service. Now I'm wondering if this is just COVID legacy, this significant increase. And the other question I wanted to ask was, is information gathered on age groupings? Are there spikes in terms of specific age groups across the piece?
Great, thanks, Dorothy. I'll see if Linda can answer the second question, and if she can't, we can certainly get that data. I would imagine we absolutely will have it, but I'll see if Linda can answer that. You might be right in terms of the COVID legacy, in terms of the increase. We get this data on a monthly basis, so we do sort of track that and see where that's going. And I think we probably just need to monitor that for the next 6 to 12 months to see what happens. I think there are so many factors that are contributing to that change. As I mentioned before, in terms of how people's health changed, but also the lockdown. And now that people are starting to come out of that, hopefully we'll see that start to plateau off a little bit. So I can't say definitively it is, but we'll absolutely continue to monitor it, and I'm hopeful that we can see that start to plateau fairly soon. But as I say, if we bring further reports back, we can let you know a bit more definitively around that.
Thank you for that. Oh, sorry, Linda, carry on.
Sorry, I was just going to answer the second question. Sorry for interrupting. In terms of the age spikes, I don't have that information to hand, but what I can say to you, and I don't know if that's helpful or not, is I did look at the number of appointments that we've had over the last 12 months, and of those appointments, 4,233 were for age 15 to 64, and in actual fact with us that would be 18 to 64, and 854 have been for over 65s. That doesn't give you specifics, but that gives you a little bit of information about the age demographics. Our Child Healthy Weight service goes up to age 18.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks for that. Quite a sobering statistic came out there in this report about 69% of is it men, 69%, 63% of women are obese. Obviously a lot of work to be done, and I'm glad that we take it so seriously. And all this work's going on with hundreds and hundreds of people, if you include the diabetes programme, taking part. So well done. Thanks for the report. And I think it's just for noting. Yeah, it is. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 12, which is Dundee IJB Internal Audit Plan Progress Report, and this is for noting.
Yeah, I'll pick this one up. You maybe saw from the chat that Tony Gaskins wasn't able to stay for the whole meeting today. He would normally kind of talk to this one, so I'll just give a kind of brief overview. So this is the kind of regular report, just kind of giving the Performance Audit Committee the overview of where the various audit assignments are as part of the audit plan and all the sort of audit work that's being done. We had hoped to be in a position of presenting the viability of external care providers report to this committee. There are still a kind of few things to be kind of finalised in that particular report, so that'll go to the next one in February. If you go way back to the start of the meeting, Anne-Marie had kind of noted some of the sort of developments around the governance action plan, and in particular kind of looking to see if some of these were still kind of relevant or kind of required at this point in time. So again, another report that will come back in February. Internal Audit have been kind of helping us with reviewing some of those actions to see whether they've now been superseded, and what actions are still relevant now, and what ones can come off and won't have a risk to our sort of overall governance arrangements at all. There are two of the kind of substantive audit assignments that are in place that will be presented hopefully in May. These are actually the two substantive ones from the current year's plan, and that relates to one that we've spoken about earlier in terms of the risk around staff resource and workforce, and the sort of various kind of interventions that we're making around that. And the other aspect is around operational planning. So while we'll have our kind of strategic kind of focus, it's about how those the strategic plans are then kind of put down to the operational level for delivery. And given that we've kind of moved to our strategic plan to more a kind of high level overview, and then a delivery plan setting out some of the more specific actions that should kind of assist us going forward in that side of things. So they're both down for May. So that's probably kind of the key things to note from that particular report today.
Dorothy?
Sorry, that's a legacy hand. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I'll take it down.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions on this item? I don't. You've explained that pretty well, Dave. The bit about the viability, etc. All the others are green, aren't they? So, yep, that duly noted. Can we? I think we're on the home straight now, aren't we? It's the final item, Arlene.
Item 13, Governance Action Plan Progress Report, and this is for noting.
And again, Chair, that's kind of links back to our kind of previous discussion earlier on. So as I said, that's we're kind of currently reviewing those outstanding actions to see what still needs to be delivered. There are still some relatively newer ones that have come from some more recent audit reports, which we're still working on, and of course we'll continue to include those on the action plan to make sure that they're delivered as expected.
Any questions on that? So that's duly noted. I'm not looking at text messages on my phone, by the way. I've got the agenda on my phone and the papers on the other screen. So in case people think about I'm looking at the phone and being rude, I'm not. I'm actually no. It's just the agenda. So I think yeah. Do you want to just take us to the end, please, Arlene?
Yeah. So item 14 is the attendance list, which is submitted for information and record purposes, and item 15, date of next meeting. As far as I understand, the dates for next year are to be submitted to the next IJB, and then once they've been agreed there, we'll get invitations sent out.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for your attendance today. It's been an interesting meeting, although I think Dave's wanting to come in just before we finish.
No, just very briefly, just on the back of Arlene's point. I mean, the pattern will broadly follow the same pattern as this year's meetings, both for the park and the IGB.
Yeah, that's been an interesting meeting. Lots of good discussion and information provided. So thanks everyone for your attendance.
Thank you.
And see you all at the next IGB next month.
Thank
Bye.
you, Chair.
Thanks all. Bye.